America's Second Industrial Revolution, 1870 to 1914. The story of America's Industrial Revolution is an epic tale full of heroes and heroines, villains and vagabonds, accomplishments and failures, sweated toil and elegant mechanisms, grand visions and unintended consequences. So how did the United States evolve from a group of 18th century agricultural colonies clustered along the eastern seaboard into the world's greatest industrial power? Why did this nation become the seedbed of so many important 19th century inventions and the birthplace of the assembly line mass production in early 20th century? Who contributed? Who benefited? And who was left behind? The Industrial Revolution began in England between 1820s and 1870s. Such things as a spinning jenny were created in England, which increased the amount of textile that could be produced, stopped allowing women not to have bleeding fingers all the time. The Industrial Revolution then centered on the United States and Germany, but we will be focusing on the Second Industrial Revolution occurring in the U.S. But first, let's recap America's first Industrial Revolution. The real incentive for America entering the Industrial Revolution was the passage of the Embargo Act of 1807 and the War of 1812. Americans were also upset over an incident with the Chesapeake, whereby the British opened fire when they're not allowed to search a ship. They also seized 4 men and hung one for desertion. This resulted in much public outrage and the passage of the Embargo Act, which stopped the export of American goods and effectively ended the import of goods from other nations. So we closed our gates, no stuff coming in or going out. Following the incident, America went to war with Great Britain, making it apparent that America needed better forms of transportation and more economic independence. So, during the first Industrial Revolution in industry, the United States was transformed by intense urbanization, meaning that people were moving from the countryside into the cities. There was rapid territorial expansion, meaning our territory was growing. We were moving west, trying to find new resources that we could use for mass production. And these changes led to the Second Industrial Revolution, which peaked between 1870 and 1914. Following the Civil War and Reconstruction, the American economy grew considerably. There was abundance of natural resources, meaning our people were moving west, finding such things as coal. Even later on, you'll see they find gold. There's a growing supply of immigrant workers from Europe. There was a movement of free African Americans, north and west, and an expanding market for manufactured goods and the availability of capital for investment. So there's more money available to invest in companies that you thought would do well. So for the first time, goods from the American interior could be shipped directly to the Atlantic and vice versa. We were being able to ship products great distances transformed the nature of the economic activity in the United States. Before the development of this elaborate transportation and communication system, economies were localized and often based on a barter system, so it's more like medieval England where I'll give you this if you give me that. The transportation revolution opened up new markets for farmers so they could sell to people in other parts of the country because it could get there faster without spoiling. And there were bankers who could now bring cotton crops into the Mississippi River Valley. Our barges could ship cotton crops from the south over to the west from the Mississippi River. There was wheat in the Midwest. And manufactured goods were now in upstate New York in a global market based on credit. Similarly, the expansion of the railroad brought a dramatic reduction in the time and money it took to move heavy goods, creating a new opportunity for wealth at a time when 2/3 of all Americans still resided on farms. The federal government actively participated in this growth by promoting industrial and agricultural development. High tariffs were enacted to protect American industry. Land was granted to railroad companies, so there's new lands that we found, and we're expanding on to kind of make it so we can go from the eastern part of the country to the west and vice versa. An army was employed to forcibly remove Indians from western land by desired farmers and companies. So this is a time in America when Indians were being pushed from their lands and were given things for that land, but this didn't make them happy, which we'll see later on. The rapid growth of factory production, mining, and railroad construction all boosted the new industrial economy and stood in stark contrast to the previous small farm and artisan workshop economy of the pre-Civil War era between 1913 and 1920. This resulted in a rapid growth of factory production, mining, railroad construction. It boosted the new industrial economy. It's basically the opposite of pre-Civil War. Pre-Civil War, we were a country of farmers. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, we moved from farming. We still had farming, but we moved from farming into a country full of industry where we pump things out in mass production, which you'll see in the assembly line later on. So between 1913 and 1920, took place 1/3 of world's industrial output. Between 1870 and 1920, almost 11 million Americans moved from the farm to the city. So this is a huge change in our demographic. 25 million immigrants arrived from overseas by 1920. And more Americans lived in cities than in farms for the first time in our history. Inventions during the Second Industrial Revolution were interconnected. The railroad spurred the growth of the telegraph machine. Telegraph lines and railroad lines inextricably were bound together as telegraph poles dotted the distance of railroad lines. So these are those telephone poles that we think of and can see today. They follow the railroads because they went from one part of the country to another. Railroads also helped our armies because we could move across the country quicker if attacked. It brought about an international and an international sense of world unity. So our countries coming together, and we were also reaching out to other countries with our products and importing their products. And these technologies also increased the pace of life and the manner in which people worked and lived. So everything seemed faster. Everything happened quicker and faster. The economic growth during this time period was extraordinary, but unstable. The world economy experienced harsh depressions in 1873 and again in 1897. Businesses competed intensely with each other and corporations battled to gain control of these industries. Countless companies failed and others were bought up by larger corporations which eventually ruled the marketplace, which we'll talk about much later, as a monopoly. So, points to ponder on, things that you guys should think about after viewing this PowerPoint. So how do we transition to a country full of industry? Who was against turning into an industrial country? What kind of men, women, and children pushed for this kind of growth in America? And who were the many innovators and inventors who became so prominent during this time in our history?